Mr. Taylor, thank you for having us in your house.
Oh, it's
your
my
home.
pleasure. I'm so glad you could come.
This is a beautiful neighborhood.
Yes, it is very nice.
Very nice. And why can't we wear shoes?
Because I grew up in Japan.
I know.
And the custom is to take off your shoes to keep the dirt outside and the cleanliness inside.
Okay.
I think it's a very good habit. You know, it's not just Japan. Many Scandinavian countries, Eastern European, the Russians all take their shoes off too.
There are some cultures you like,
Many
apart
cultures.
from the American.
Many cultures,
Aha.
of course, yes.
The Latins you don't like that much, or you do?
Oh, I don't know. Are there Latin dances, for example?
Yeah, of course we have.
Rumba, and
Oh, of
cha-cha,
course.
tango. No, some of them are very
You
nice
know, we
dances.
travel this far because we would like to understand.
Yes.
What does it mean to be a supremacist, a white supremacist?
Well, a white supremacist is someone, a white person, or I suppose it could be someone of any race, who thinks that white people should dominate or rule over people of other races. I don't think anyone believes that.
Okay.
There was a time when there was such a thing as white supremacy. The colonization of Africa was, you could describe that as a white supremacist enterprise, or slavery based on race. You could call that white supremacist. But today, no one that I know of or have even heard of could be described as wanting to dominate and rule over people of other races. That is a historical term that should be retired. But people frequently use it to describe people like me because it makes us sound wicked and horrible.
You're not wicked, not
I'm not
horrible.
the least bit wicked and not the least bit horrible.
No?
No.
And you don't like people to call you because you're not? You were telling me?
Well,
White
I'm not at all a white supremacist.
supremacist.
And for people to use that term, it is just the most insulting and provocative term possible to describe a white person. It's really the equivalent of what we call the N-word. If you want to be as insulting as possible to a black person, you call him the N-word. If you want to be as insulting as possible to a white person, you call him a white supremacist.
Okay. That's interesting.
Now,
Are you a racist?
I reject that term as well because the
Explain.
term racist has many different meanings and the meaning seems to shift all the time. But whatever is included in that word is always pejorative. A racist cannot be a good or moral person, however the term racist is defined. And I have absolutely no hesitation in saying that my views on race are in conformity with human nature, our understanding of history, and are morally completely unimpeachable. So my ideas, however they're defined, cannot be characterized by a term that is ipso facto pejorative.
Then explain, what do you stand for in this American Renaissance?
American Renaissance really stands for two basic things. One is a realistic approach to race.
What do you mean realistic?
Many people now have this silly, fashionable view that race is a social construct, that it's something that sociologists invented. It's some kind of phantasm that is imagined. Well, race is very clearly a biological phenomenon. And race is also part of individual and group identity. It is a natural expression of the tribal nature of man to feel a kind of affinity to people that you are closely related to. And you are more closely related to people of the same race as you are to people of different races. At the same time, a realistic understanding of race must recognize that the races, although there's an enormous amount of overlap, enormous amount of commonality, on average they are not the same and equivalent. And so if you have a
And
population...
they are not in what ways?
Oh, the best studied way is in average intelligence. Now, I suspect there are other ways that are not as well studied. The ability to defer gratification, or the inclination to use violence.
But let me
These
understand.
things, yes.
Let me understand.
Certainly.
So, if I get it, there are people intelligent than others because only for the race they have?
No,
They was born with?
Well, you have to understand that intelligence is, by and large, determined, the outer limits of it are determined by genetics. A great deal of individual variation in intelligence is determined by genes. This is a well-recognized fact. And it is increasingly clear that the differences at group averages between blacks and whites and Asians, for example, those two have a genetic component to them. And the idea that this is somehow all purely due to environment is increasingly difficult to support.
Okay.
The evidence simply does not go in that direction.
And in those studies that you know, let's say, who are the most intelligent people in the world?
The most intelligent people?
The race
yes.
that are more intelligent?
The group that is most intelligent is Ashkenazi Jews. And then second most intelligent as a large group are East Asians. There are many, many tests. There's much evidence for this. Okay. And then next in line are Caucasians. And then you have different groups that follow after that. But the least intelligent on average are sub-Saharan black Africans and then also Australian Aborigines. Okay. And you don't even have to know anything about IQ testing or genetics to realize that over the last 500 years, East Asians have created impressive civilizations. And even in Latin America, there's been a kind of, the pre-Columbian civilizations. But there's very little that has come out of sub-Saharan Africa that could be described as a really magnificent contribution to human culture.
So let's imagine that the immigrants that come to the U.S. are from East Asia and not from Honduras or Guatemala or Colombia.
Yes.
It would bother you as it bothers you now?
Well, for me, if white people who are...
I am white?
Yeah, you look pretty white to me, yes.
Okay.
But white people used to be about 90% of the population of the United States. But now, through massive immigration of non-white people, we are becoming a minority. We also have relatively low birth rates. And the projection is that by 2042, we will be a minority. Mm-hmm. And in their bones, in their deepest, most secret thoughts, white people don't want to become a minority. But
who's saying that?
Well, I look at what they do. When the neighborhood becomes majority non-white, white people move away. And when the school becomes majority non-white, they take their children out of that school and put them in a school that is still largely white. But they have been so propagandized and so intimidated, they would never say, I want to live in a majority white neighborhood. But that is what they almost always do. Not now. The trouble is, very few white people are brave enough.
Let me say something.
Yeah.
How do you know that?
I look at what they do.
But they don't say it.
They're afraid to say it.
Then how do you know that's the reason?
Because I see what they do. When Southern California,
maybe they move because they don't like, I don't know, the rent was too high. I don't know, maybe they have another reason.
When they move to a white neighborhood, the rent is higher.
Okay.
Almost always. No, in fact, when you get white people to speak honestly, some of them will admit it. But the fact is, if you ask a white person, name a neighborhood, name a majority non-white neighborhood you would like to live in, they'd come up completely blank. Or if you ask them to name a majority non-white school they'd like to send their children to,
because it's not politically correct to say.
Oh, it's politically very correct to say, oh, I'd love my child to attend this school that's 50% black and 30%
Latinos and Asians.
But they don't send their children to those schools. They send them to other schools. Believe me, if you see the way white people behave in this country, they do not want to be a minority.
Okay, so let's not talk about the majority. I want to know about you.
Me?
You would take out your kids from school if they were with the majority blacks, or if your neighbor, let's say, your neighbor is a black family. What would you do?
I chose this neighborhood because it is not only majority white, but the schools in this area are majority white. And that suits me just as it suits my neighbors. Now, there are many, many Americans who can't afford to live in a neighborhood like this, who have to send their children to school where there are many people who speak no English. If there's a PTA meeting, you have to have 5 interpreters, 10 interpreters, where a lot of the class time is spent teaching people either to speak English or to behave, to sit down and listen. This is something that is very clearly different from the different kinds of schools, depending on who's attending. Asians, East Asians, they tend to do very well in school, just like whites. And so a mix of Asians and whites is generally going to be a very good school. But if you have a large number of blacks and Hispanics, I can assure you that 99% of the time you're going to have problems that neither Asians nor whites want for their children.
I don't believe you.
You must study the question a little bit better then.
No, I don't believe that you think that way. Maybe the Latinos, why can't they be bright and smart, and they usually speak perfectly English, and a lot of them had grow in or born in the U.S.
That is true.
So they are Americans like the rest of the kids attending the school, let's say.
If one of the most important statistics to understand about the future of the United States is that when, by the time they get to 12th grade, that's the end of high school in the United States, blacks and Hispanics, although Hispanics are doing somewhat better than blacks, on average, they are doing mathematics and reading at about the same level as 8th graders who are white or Asian. That is to say, they're performing at about 4 years behind whites and Asians. This sort of thing is very well documented if you take the time to look into it.
And the responsibility is because of the blacks and the Latins and not of the system or the teachers or the schools?
Tell me, we have 13,000 school districts in the United States. That's a great many school districts. There's probably not a single one where blacks perform better than Asians or Hispanics perform better than Asians. Always you find the same pattern. Is that because in every school district, despite the fact that every one of them is trying to get the same outcome for every group, is everyone somehow unconsciously imparting racism, holding down the blacks and Hispanics? Is that why? And why is it? If it's not a reflection of the students themselves, why is it in what is alleged to be a white supremacist society, why is it that Asian students are doing better than white students? I think it reflects their inherent ability. Now, there are environmental differences as well. In a terrible environment, people of any race will do poorly. But when you have 13,000 school districts and you have exactly the same results wherever you go, the rational conclusion, along with many other pieces of evidence, is that the groups are simply not identical and replaceable.
Okay. What is the dream of the America you think is the one that you should live in?
Well, it's really not so much a dream for America. It's a dream for every group. In the United States, as you no doubt know, there's a great deal of racial conflict. We've had riots in Baltimore, we had riots in Ferguson, we have all kinds of controversies whenever there are Oscar nominations, are enough blacks nominated, are enough Hispanics nominated. There's always this constant jostling. Are enough blacks being admitted to Harvard or MIT? Are enough blacks becoming police officers or firefighters? Constant tension. And this sort of thing...
Can I tell you something? You know why is that? Because they are Americans.
Well, wait. But if
those blacks, those Latins, they are Americans also.
They're certainly American citizens. Yeah, but the point is.
So they have the same right.
Of course, but we have a situation in which there is constant tension, constant conflict because of this attempt to build a multiracial society. I don't think anyone is happy in this society. Ask black people here, are you happy in America? Ask them, is this country the way you want it to be? Or if you ask Hispanics, are you happy in America the way it is? There is a great deal of unhappiness. And my point is, I want black people, Latin people, Asian people to be the best possible people they can, and my belief is that they will be the best Asians, Latin, and blacks if they live in a society that reflects their culture, their heritage, and seeks a destiny for them independently of other groups.
Where's that?
I believe, excuse me?
Where's that?
Well, that is where there is a coherent, essentially monoracial situation. In other words, most people are going to be much happier if they have a government that reflects them, if they have police authorities, if they have school authorities that reflect them.
But what do you mean? They have to go where? Because this is the country they were born in.
I'm not at all talking about any kind of expulsion, but there could be voluntary separation and establishment.
Which is?
Well, that means we already have a certain amount of voluntary separation, which is why you have black neighborhoods, you have white neighborhoods, you have Asian neighborhoods. But every institution in American society says, let me finish.
The U.S. in the 60s.
Excuse me?
Like the segregation in the 60s.
No, that was forced segregation. I'm talking about voluntary. And if people really do want to live in a mixed society, they should have that right too. All I'm saying is, if I'm a black person and I want to live among black people and spend my time living in black culture and appreciating black history and never have anything to do with white people, they should have that right. And white people should have that right too. But
here
for
in
that
the
purpose,
US?
Here in the U.S.
Okay.
But for that purpose, we need some kind of understanding that this kind of separation is legitimate. Instead of every institution in society saying, no, you have to mix, like it or not. If instead it was recognized that that kind of desire is entirely legitimate, people wish to be left alone, then we could have institutions, we could have areas, we could perhaps have even independent countries in which there was an understanding that this area is by and large for blacks or Hispanics or whites. It's a kind of mutual respect and voluntary separation. That would be my ideal. And that is the kind of situation that you have in some of the most successful countries in the world. The Asian countries, the Japanese, the Koreans, the Taiwanese, they have a society that is racially and culturally homogeneous. They don't have anything like the conflict we have. And also in Eastern Europe, you have countries like Poland and Hungary that are fighting very hard to maintain their racial and cultural homogeneity because they don't want the problems that they see in the West. If we could apply that kind of understanding to the United States, I think we could arrive at creative solutions that are entirely moral and based on voluntary choice.
But you know, people come to the United States because they have opportunities and because this is a culture made of immigrants.
Well,
you were an immigrant?
No,
you were born?
My ancestors were not immigrants.
My
ancestors were pioneers. They built this
pioneers,
country.
Exactly.
Yes, they were pioneers. They built this country to which immigrants now come. At the same time, of course, when they built this country, their understanding was that it was going to be a country for Europeans. The very first nationality laws, naturalization laws in the United States passed by the very first Congress limited citizenship to free white persons of good character. They had an idea that this was to be an extension of Europe, not some sort of mishmash grab bag. It was never intended to be that. It became that after a new immigration law passed in 1965 that began to gradually change the entire character of the United States, and I would say against the wishes of the majority of whites. If you had told whites back at that time in 1965 when the new law was changed, if you told them you're 90% of the population now, but in 60, 70, 80 years, you're going to be a minority, do you think they would have agreed to a law like that? Impossible.
Do you have black friends or only Asian friends?
I have black acquaintances. I've worked I used to do a lot of music. I played in various musical groups and I got along very well with black musicians. clarinet and saxophone.
And are you good?
Oh, I used to be good. Yes. But no, I can get along fine with people of any race. And individuals can always get along with individuals of another group. When you try to get large numbers of people to live together, once you reach a certain critical mass of those numbers, they don't want to assimilate. You have many blacks who want to maintain a black culture, a black society, and that's fine. But you have to realize that that kind of side-by-side culture is constantly in contact, constantly in conflict, and it causes troubles in every part of American life. If every time you open the newspaper, if it's a story about welfare use, if it's a story about crime, if it's a story about immigration, it's also a story about the inevitable conflict that arises from trying to make a nation multiracial.
Don't you think that is because people think like you?
All people at some level have some sense of racial identity unless they have deliberately tried to suppress it. And in the United States today, it's only whites who have tried very, very hard to suppress any kind of racial identity. If I were explaining my views, if you were a black journalist and I were explaining my views, you would have no trouble understanding me, because black Americans have a sense of race, they have a sense of identity, they have a sense of association with the people that they consider, they're the people they call brother, sister, because they have a biological sense of kinship to them. They understand me. You would be surprised to know black people often understand my view much more easily than whites, because they have a sense of race. It's only whites out of whom the sense of race has been severely beaten and battered by years and years of being told, no, you must not have a racial identity. Every other group does.
But you're going to continue, even if the years pass, being there's going to be always a black race, a white race, an Asian race, even if it keeps mixing.
Well, there might not. Some time ago, I debated with a black professor at an American university. And the question was, is diversity good for the United States? And he said, yes, it's wonderful. And he said, one of the reasons it's good is because with immigration from all around the world and with more and more intermarriage, in 200 years, there'll be no more white people. And that's a wonderful thing, he thought. Well, I don't think that's a wonderful thing. I don't want my group to go extinct. I like the idea of there being people who listen to the same music I do, who have the same myths, who have the same heritage, the same artistic sensibilities. I don't want to go extinct. No healthy person does. But the way the United States is heading now, if every single institution of society says mixed marriages are fine, immigration from everywhere is fine, everyone is the same, don't worry, then whites will disappear. I don't want that to happen. Ultimately, it's a question of the survival of my people. And I have absolutely no apologies for working for the survival of my people.
Okay. Are you a father?
Yes, I am.
How many kids you have?
2 children.
And grandchildren already?
Not yet.
Not yet.
That would be
What
nice.
happened if one of your, you have a boy, a girl?
I have 2 girls.
2 girls.
Yes.
If they fall in love with a black guy or with
That
a
would be
Colombian,
too bad, yes.
they're very handsome, bright, and nice.
A bright, nice Colombian.
Yes.
Oh, that might be a possibility. But
you think so?
Well, I mean, that might not be so bad. I think
Not
most
so
people,
bad.
Well, depending on what the Colombian, well, nice castizo Colombian. But anyway, no, this is a question people love to ask me. They say, what would you do if your child married a black person? Well, I believe in complete freedom of association. And so, if that is what they choose to do, I will not oppose them. I will explain to them why I am opposed to it, but they are free to do whatever it is they choose to do. I don't think they will. I think most people naturally are attracted to people like themselves, not to people who are unlike themselves physically and culturally and linguistically. I'm not very worried about that, to tell you the truth. But, again, I think it is perfectly natural for most people, whatever their race, to want their grandchildren to resemble their grandparents. There's a kind of continuity, a loyalty to your family line, to your heritage, to your race, to your family, to your language, to your religion. All of those things are natural. They're natural and entirely good and healthy. And that's why when people want to call me names, white supremacist, racist, no. What I want for my people is, I think, entirely healthy, and I recognize the desire, exactly those same desires in every other people. You have Jews who want their children to marry Jews and their grandchildren to be Jews. You have black people who want their children to marry other black people and to have grandchildren who are black. Asians. This is a very common attitude. It's only when it's expressed by a white person, then it's considered some sort of hate and bigotry.
Okay. I never thought of it that way, from that point of view.
Well, I'm glad you came and had a chance to talk to me.
It was very nice meeting you, sir.
All right. That's no more questions?
No. I do have more. I would like to talk about politics.
What happened?
Yes. What happened with you inside of you?
Yes.
I'm not talking about your political view, but what happened in this house, your conversations when Obama went president of the United States. It bothered you?
Well, it was symbolically a very important thing.
For you?
Well, for the entire country.
Okay.
I was not surprised. I mean, this is the way the United States is headed. I didn't vote for Barack Obama, but for him to be president, we've had blacks who are Secretary of State, blacks who are Supreme Court justices, blacks who are heads of Fortune 500 companies. It was only a matter of time before a non-white person became president of the United States. What I found hilarious about the election of Barack Obama was the complete naivete of almost the entire country in assuming that somehow this meant that all of America's racial problems were over. I don't know if you remember the just almost religious hysteria of how America welcomed this first black president.
Yeah.
Oh, our problems are solved.
Well,
And as I
but it was a big step.
It was a step. It was an inevitable step, more symbolic than anything else. And I was on a radio program at the time, and I said, look, I live in Virginia. We had a black man elected governor of Virginia, and people said all the same things. This was part of the Confederacy. Oh, these storied land of racism and bad white people finally elects a black governor. I said, look, does that suddenly mean that black people are going to stop killing each other at a high rate? Or does it suddenly mean that white people are going to want to have Mexican neighbors? Does it mean that more black people are going to marry their girlfriends before they have children? None of these things is going to change. None. And to think that just because we have a black chief executive, we're in a post-racial America. It was so naive. And many people will tell you that when he was elected, all the polls showed that Americans were much more optimistic about race relations. By the time he left office, people in America were as pessimistic about race relations as they have ever been. Changing the color of the president does not change the immense difficulty of trying to build a multiracial society. It doesn't make it go away.
But what happens when Trump gets into the White House?
Well,
for you?
For me?
Yeah.
Well, I did vote for Donald Trump.
And do you think America is better now?
America, the processes that I oppose, the processes whereby whites are being reduced to a minority, have been slowed down. There's no question about that. There are fewer refugees. He is making sure that more illegal immigrants are sent out of the country. He has tried to look into the whole question of Muslim immigration. And all of those things are good. He's talked about, yes, all of those things are good. But I don't think that he has propounded these policies because he thinks the same way I do. He's not racially conscious. He has instincts, and his instinct tells him that illegal immigration is a bad thing. People should come legally. And he also has a sense that if illegal immigrants come to the United States and go on welfare or commit crimes, that's absolutely preposterous.
What about the people who come and work?
If they come here illegally, he is absolutely right to be opposed to them. And when he was campaigning, he said he was going to send every one of them home. I wish he had.
What about all the stories of these kids
Excuse me?
The kids that we saw in welfares, separated from their parents.
Well, if you break a law in the United States and you have to go to jail, you're going to be separated from your children. It's too bad. Those people crossing the border, they broke a law. It's illegal entry into the United States. And you do not put children in jail with parents who have been detained because they broke a law. Who is ultimately to blame for that separation? It's the people who illegally tried to enter the United States.
That's what you think?
That's obviously the case. That's obviously the case. If they'd stayed home, they'd be together, wouldn't they? If they had not tried to break the laws of the United States, they would still be together. What the people who are saying, oh, separation is terrible, what they want is these people who came in illegally to be released into the United States and we will never see them again. In effect, they're saying anyone who can cross the border with a child and say, you can't separate me from my children, then they have a free access to the United States. That is in effect what they want. And I say, no, you have a choice. You can break our laws or you cannot break our laws. If you break our laws, these are the consequences. It may be very sad for you and for your children, but you have the choice whether you observe our laws or break them.
You know, I read these numbers before coming here.
Yes.
About the groups of supremacists. I know you don't like to be called that way. Since Trump got into the White House until today.
Yes.
There's like 954 groups all over America.
Who's counting them?
Well, the same that are doing the studies you told me before.
No.
No, you know, there's a group. There's called Southern Poverty Law Center.
Yes, I've heard of that.
Okay.
They hate me. They hate me.
I imagine they do.
Yes, they hate me.
Okay.
And it's their job to say, oh, these people are bad. Those people are bad. And by saying these people are hate mongers, then they're trying to make sure that nobody even listens to us, because the Southern Poverty Law Center, in its wisdom and its infinite bliss, has said, this Jared Taylor guy, he is such a bad guy, you better not even listen to him. And he's a white supremacist, whether he admits it or not. They're mind readers, you see. They know what I think even better than I do.
Are you a religious person?
I don't like to talk about religion. I don't think that's relevant.
But I would like to know in your life.
Well,
are you a Catholic? Do you go to church?
I don't think that's relevant to these political
matters.
It
is to know who you are.
Well, I'm sorry.
What do you believe?
That will have to be left a mystery to you.
What do you believe in?
Oh, I believe in many things. I believe in love. I believe in liberty. I believe in freedom of association.
Why don't you share that with us?
I'm sharing it with you.
No. Your religion. Why is that so private?
Well, there are things that are private, yes.
Okay, and that is one?
That is one, yes.
Okay.
I'm sorry to disappoint.
No.
But no, you were asking about the number of these groups, these so-called
hate groups.
Now, have I said anything that makes you think that I'm motivated by hatred?
No, but you know, when you talk,
yes.
I think when people listens to you, maybe they get to hate other races.
But why would they do that? Why is anything that I've said, why would that make anyone hate anyone?
Yes, of course, because you don't want to be together with the black people, because you don't want your kid to be in the same school, because you think they are less intelligent, because the crimes in the U.S. are committed by black or Latinos more than white people.
Tell me this. Mm-hmm. If you have some neighbors and you disapprove of the way they're rearing their children, and you would rather that your children did not marry their children, can that only mean that you hate them? No, you make decisions in your life all the time. Maybe you prefer wine to beer. Does that mean you hate beer? Maybe you prefer opera to rock and roll. Do you hate rock and roll? This is very, very silly. I have a loyalty to my culture and my people. That doesn't mean I hate anything about anybody else. I can like Mexican food. I like it very much. I like Japanese food. There are many characteristics of black people that I admire. They have a kind of a spontaneity and a kind of generosity. I think they have many uninhibited good points about them. It doesn't mean that I want to be replaced by those people. It's basically a matter of wanting my tribe to survive.
Okay, but you agree.
Excuse me, let me finish with one more point. When the Japanese say they do not want to admit refugees into Japan because Japan would change, do you think that's because they hate Iraqis, or they hate Iranians, or they hate Syrians? Do you think that's why? No. They just want to preserve their own culture. Hate has nothing to do with it. And it's the SPLC who has promoted this idea that my survival, my working for my own survival, can somehow not be motivated by my love and appreciation for my own people, but for hatred for everyone else. This is completely wrong, but they have been very successful in promoting this completely topsy-turvy distortion of what is an ordinary, healthy, normal way to feel about your own people.
Okay, let me ask you from a different point of view.
All right.
Then, are there groups, hate groups in the United States?
Oh, I think the Southern Poverty Law Center certainly acts as if it hates people like me. They would like me to be out of a job. They would like for me to have no source of income. They want to shut me up. That sounds very hateful to me. I don't try to shut them up. If you have a group of Latinos who want to celebrate their rising numbers and who think that every illegal immigrant should be amnestied and become granted U.S. citizen, I don't try to shut them up. No, they have every right to say that if that's what they want. Now, there may be groups like, for example, the new Black Panther Party. The head of the new Black Panther Party, King Shabazz, he says that the only way that blacks can be free is if they kill all white people, starting with the babies. That sounds pretty hateful to me. I don't know of any white group that takes that attitude. Now, I don't know the minds of every single person,
okay, I understand.
but I know of no group that's talking about killing people or running them out of the country or stripping them. I don't know of anybody who's talking that way.
How close or far are you from, let's say, the Ku Klux Klan?
I have nothing to do with the Ku Klux Klan.
No?
In any case, I can tell you what I think, but if you ask me what some other group thinks, what some other person thinks, you have to ask them. I can tell you what I think.
You have nothing in common with them?
Well, we both, we all breathe the same air. I don't pay attention to the Ku Klux Klan.
No?
No.
But some people gets you to, they compare your kind of thinking as the Ku Klux Klan, for example, or other white supremacists.
They can compare my thinking to that of the Communist Party or the National Man-Boy Love Association if they wish. That's entirely up to them. I speak only for myself.
After so many years of civil rights battles,
yes,
don't you think this race thing, this issue, which is very, very strong, not only in America, but in the world. It's a big challenge that it has no boundaries, that maybe it shouldn't have boundaries, that we should all get together and live wherever we want, respecting the law. I understand that.
For how long has this civil rights struggle been going on in the United States?
For years and years.
A long time?
Yes.
Have we really made any kind of fundamental progress? Decade after decade, decade after decade. We're told the next generation, just a moment, the next generation is going to all hold hands and sing Kumbaya and, as you say, live happily ever after. And it never comes. Doesn't that raise the possibility that that vision may be mistaken? That is futile to try to build a nation or a world in which race can be made not to matter. You are making my point when you talk about how long this is going on, that it is a worldwide phenomenon. Doesn't that suggest to you that we are better off recognizing that it doesn't work? In the United States, blacks and whites have been living together for, 300 years now? I think it's time we recognized this marriage has failed. We need a divorce. You can't go on making the same mistakes generation after generation, century after century. If, as you say, this struggle has gone on for this long and we still haven't succeeded, maybe the goal was mistaken.
Okay. I don't know how it would succeed.
It would succeed.
From your point of view.
It would succeed by recognizing that this attempt to build this mixed society in which everyone is equal and everyone respects each other and everyone lives happily under the same laws, it's not working. And so if you have a small number of people who want to live that way, let them do so. But those who think that this is a mistake, let them live separately. That's all I'm saying.
Do you think your ideas will succeed?
You know, I hope they will. But it makes no difference ultimately if they do or not, because I feel as though I have a duty to my ancestors to preserve their way of life, and to my children and their children to create a world in which they can continue, if they wish, in the heritage of Europe.
Okay.
So I do hope that my ideas will succeed, and I can assure you of this: more and more Americans all the time are waking up to the racial crisis they face as white people, as they become not just a minority, but a despised minority, blamed for everything that ever goes wrong for black people or for Hispanics. And as they realize this, they are going to, if they care about the future, if they care about their country, eventually they'll do something about it. And there are more and more of us, I can assure you. And the reason is because the way we see the world is correct. And this idea that race is a myth, that everyone's equal, that we can overcome this sense of racial loyalty, all of that is simply a misreading of human nature. And when you try to build a society on a misreading of human nature, it will not work, just the way this one is not working.
Okay. When you're not here, when you die, when you pass away,
yes,
how would you like to be remembered?
I would like to be remembered as a man who worked for his people.
¿Cómo se dice epitafio, Sylvie?
Epitaph. Epitaph. Yes.
How would it say?
Oh, I don't know. People don't have the right, I suppose they shouldn't write their own epitaphs.
No?
I'd say, oh, I don't know. He stood up for his people. I think that would be all the epitaph. That would be a fine epitaph for me.
What defines a white people?
White
when
people?
You say the white people.
Well, I think most of the time it's not too difficult to see who is white and who is not. The people whose ancestors were living in Europe 100 years ago, 500 years ago. In fact, when it comes to affirmative action in arranging for special preferences for people who are not white, you know about this situation in the United States. People have no trouble distinguishing whites from non-whites. But in any case, I don't think that that's a particularly difficult problem determining who is white. The people from Europe are white.
Okay. Thank you, sir, very much. Nice to meet you.
It's been my pleasure.
Gracias.
De nada.